Mining Minute, I'm your host Teresa, joined here by Ashley and KWG Resources CEO Frank Smink. We're downtown Toronto at Canoe Landing having a conversation about Ontario's Ring of Fire, and we want to let you in on that conversation today.
So what I wanted to ask you, Frank, was moving forward with the Ontario's Ring of Fire project, what is the biggest obstacle you think you're facing at the moment?
I think making sure that the First Nations that are directly affected, have a complete understanding of what's going to happen is the principal thing.
So what are you doing to make sure that they are getting a good understanding of what is going to happen?
Actually, they're helping themselves. They've called for a meeting of all interested parties in Thunder Bay the week after next, early August.
And is KWG Resources going to be at that meeting in Thunder Bay?
Well, we were invited. I mean, our idea for the railroad through the traditional territory of Martin Falls, or the transportation corridor through the traditional territory of Martin Falls is in many ways what's precipitated this meeting.
Is the government about to release more information on the transportation corridor regarding Ontario's Ring of Fire, Frank?
I don't know, and I don't think the people, the chief of Martin Falls knows either. They have had meetings, which didn't include us, but the premier has said that either they all get together or she's going to back an option that doesn't include all of them. So I hope so.
I was under the impression that the Ontario government had released a timeline for their decisions on this particular issue.
Yeah, so many weeks ago, the Premier had actually written a letter to all of the Matawa First Nations that said, we want you to come to a conclusion with your considerations in a number of weeks. And I think a number of weeks, in my world, that a number of weeks has passed.
So perhaps this trip to Thunder Bay is directly related to that agenda regarding some of the members of Matawa First Nation.
Certainly the Martin Falls First Nation.
Okay.
And I'd like to think that, the physical reality is the traditional lands of a given First Nation are very much recognized in both government and in their culture. So this north-south right-of-way passes 80% or more, 85% through the traditional territory of Martin Falls, and so they're the key stakeholder, and it's very important for the people of that community to be fully informed, and that's what the meeting in Thunder Bay is all about.
Frank, what has KWG Resources done to learn about the Native communities involved and how better to help them out in understanding what's going on with the Ring of Fire?
Well, we visit with members of the community as often as possible. One of the things we learned is in First Nations, in the matters of First Nations, there's three umbrella organizations that affect these communities. There's the Anishinaabe Nation, the Northern Ontario-wide Treaty 9 governing body. There's the Chiefs of Ontario, which they're part of, and then there's the Matawa First Nations, and there's other organizations also. And they're all, in the case of Matawa, they've had a lot of interaction with the Ontario government. But all of that organization and that structure actually brings the chiefs and their councillors to Toronto a great deal. So we have quite a few opportunities to meet with them on a regular basis, and we try and do that to keep them as informed as we can.
And Frank, do you know if there's other members that are going to be attending at Thunder Bay other than Martin Falls?
At this point, I don't. KWG was grateful to be invited and to make a few suggestions, and we have a lot of background information. We've become acquaintances and I would say friends of three successive chiefs in Martin Falls. But I don't know if Webequie would be an obvious attendee, as would Arrowland. But I think what the Martin Falls leadership is focused on is educating the members of their community. In the case of Martin Falls, it's a remote place on the Albany River, a fly-in community, and the bulk of their membership lives in Thunder Bay. So that's why it's important for them to communicate with their own membership in Thunder Bay, because even though they don't live on the reservation, they're still voting members of the First Nation.
How would you rate the success of the interactions with KWG and the natives compared to when this project first started to now?
That's a great question. I think I think we've gotten to know each other, and like in any interpersonal relationship, that's been of a great deal of assistance. I think there was a lot of fear of the unknown. You know, you go to a new place, a new country, really, almost. They don't know you, you don't know them. So we suffered through some pretty aggressive interaction early on, blockade of our drilling program, a threat of burning up one of our exploration camps. That's all behind us. We now communicate regularly by text mostly, interestingly enough, by email, by telephone. They're very busy people, as you can imagine. Running a nation keeps you running, but so it's much improved.
So, Frank, would you guys be, friends enough now to have a beer together?
Absolutely, yes. When they come to town, I think we both sides find it very productive to break bread, which is, the social phrase of getting together over a meal and over a drink.
Ashley?
Is there anything that you've learned from your relations with the natives to help you in your business practices in other areas and stuff that you may take with you after?
That's a really good question. What I've learned is that how young Canada is, and how contemporary this history is, and it was captured in something that my dear friend Teresa Hall said to me. Teresa is the former two-term chief of the Attawapiskat First Nation. Before that, she was a Justice of the Peace in the North, a well-educated, thoughtful, philosophical woman. And she said, Frank, after we got to know each other a little bit, I often think of the time that I remember, the first thought, we all have them as individuals. First memory I had, I was probably 3 years old, and I was sitting in the middle of a canoe. And my grandmother was paddling at the front of the canoe, and my grandfather was paddling at the back of the canoe. And we were on the Attawapiskat River, and it was morning, and we were coming out of a morning mist. And later in life, whenever I look back on that, it occurs to me, it has always occurred to me that's a metaphor for when I came out of the Stone Age into the modern age. And that, to me, it was kind of a very evocative, somewhat humbling thing to be told, but it really hit home to me what a new country we are, how unexplored we are, how little we know, and how nearby that was. That in her generation, she was on the land. She was the last of the people that lived a nomadic existence, and here I am, and we've become good friends. We're almost the same age, and I came from another part of the world after the Second World War, and here we are friends. That can only happen in Canada. I mean, it happens elsewhere in the world, but it is, and here we are trying to get to know each other to make a mineral deposit turn into a big business. I think that was an excellent question.
Tell me this week, do you have an update for me about Debut Diamonds?
Well, I do. The junior resource market is coming alive a little bit. So there's interest in some commodities more than others. I think zinc kind of led the way, but we're seeing it in gold, and we're seeing it in nickel, and so it's also had an effect on diamonds. There is ongoing activity in the area of our diamond interests at the Victor Mine. I learned recently from friends in the community that fascinating turn of events, really. The members of Attawapiskat First Nation who are employed one way or another by the Victor operation, either at the site or in the community, got together and had a meeting of their own and resolved to ask the chief and council of the Attawapiskat First Nation to move to indicate to De Beers that the community would consent to De Beers going ahead with developing the Tango extension and thereby possibly extending the life of the operation at Victor. The result of that was somewhat, I don't want to overstate it, but somewhat historic, is that Chief Ignace Gull and his council passed a resolution, taking exactly that position and communicated that to De Beers. So to me, that's kind of a breakthrough, and it's kind of a big shot in the arm for the McFadyen properties of Debut Diamonds, which adjoin the northern boundary of the De Beers holdings, including the Tango extension. And so we're communicating with folks at De Beers and at Attawapiskat to see if we can help things along.
Stan, recently Martin Falls re-elected chief and council. Can you tell me what happened there?
Absolutely. The incumbent chief, Bruce Achnipanescum, was re-elected, and that's quite important, I think, for the Ring of Fire. He's a visionary, and continuity in the circumstances is important. He's very pro-development. He's got, as is the majority of his community, and he's quite diplomatic and politic in how he is able to build consensus in that community, which is a bifurcated community. A minority of them live on the reservation at Goki Post on the north side of the Albany River, but the majority of them live in Thunder Bay. And we talked previously about having been to a symposium that he arranged for the information of the members of his community to understand us and who we are and what we're doing. So we're all very encouraged that Chief Bruce was re-elected.
Yes, and congratulations to Chief Bruce, and thanks for joining me again today, Frank.
Pleasure. This is the annual summer version of the Mining Minute when they're on holidays. Since everything in the Haliburton is underwater, we thought we'd come here to high ground and stand beside a boat that hasn't been raised yet at Terry Fox Park by the Big Red Canoe.
Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome.
Mining Minute. I'm your host, Teresa, joined here by my special guest, Ashley.
And we're here to give you 5 interesting facts about Ontario's Ring of Fire.
Ring of Fire companies are developing mining partnerships and proposals with Martin Falls First Nations and other Matawa members regarding Ring of Fire development.
Ontario's Ring of Fire spans approximately 5,000 square kilometers. That's about the size of Trinidad.
Ring of Fire companies are interested in mineral exploration and development in an environmentally sound way that focuses on honoring Aboriginal treaties and rights.
KWG Resources' natural gas reduction method can use more natural gas than coal-based energy. This could result in about a 50% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions when compared with the most current energy-efficient best practices.
The Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, is pushing for quick action regarding Ontario's Ring of Fire development.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Mining Minute.
Do you have some updates for me about the Hyperloop contest that KWG Resources was a finalist in?
Yeah. Yes and no. Not so much an update on the contest. We learned that we were one of 35 semifinalists. We haven't learned anything further about that. But we have started looking more closely at the whole idea of the transportation option, particularly that that it looks more clear that it will be underground and that it will be substantial bulk. And we're now looking at the option of the real feasibility of building something like a tube enclosed ore carrier system, because that tube can go from resting on top of pylons, where it's quite environmentally friendly, capital and maintenance efficient, but also and will manage the volumes that we have in contemplation. But that tube can actually go underground, where the deposits are, and carry on down to the bottom of these ore bodies. And so we can drop the ore into the ore carriers. If you can visualize that. So we're spending more time looking at the option, and it is looking increasingly promising.
John Bruhl, thank you for being here, John.
Thank you for having me.
John, what's it like being an investor in today's market?
Well, let's just say it's easier to go out and spend $10,000 at the casino than it is to spend $10,000 having done your due diligence on a junior resource stock. The business is no longer about raising capital and laying off risk. It's about pretending to lay off the risk for the investor. So we have massive regulation. We have banks that own the insurance companies, the brokerage firms. The investment advisors are not permitted or not encouraged to put you in the direction of stocks like KWG Resources. So people tend not to do that. But you still see them lined up every day at the grocery store to buy their lottery tickets, where their chances of actually creating something of value, which is what KWG is trying to do, is zero. Their chances of winning is pretty much zero. So that's why I'd put my money in KWG.
Frank, with regard to the road to Martin Falls, how will that affect your right-of-way claims?
Well, we're profoundly. We are working that out. We have had many conversations, and we have an understanding in principle as to best way to put it is what the aspirations on both sides are, and I think we are mutually supportive of those aspirations. In our case, we would like to see them, the Martin Falls First Nation and their neighbors, perhaps participate in what we're doing. We've made no secret of our view that we'd like to find the way to make them full partners in the mining operation, in the mineral production. And from our perspective, the mining mineral production includes the transportation of the stuff down south to markets or to a place where it can be further processed. So we've been very public about our aspiration to do that, and we cited the example of Northland Power and their very successful formula in creating partnerships with First Nations to generate solar power, wind power, and so on. On their side, they, I think it's fair to say, encourage us to stay the course and be their partner and help them navigate their way both around the mining business and the capital markets. I think it is profound to me because it's new ground.
Excellent. So you must be communicating then with Martin Falls on a regular basis.
They are, there's very few of them, and they're very, very busy people. And when they call it a First Nation, it's because they do everything a nation state does, and it's unbelievable how much a chief and his councillor have to do on a daily basis. But in the case of, with the backing of the province of Ontario, they've provided resources to see this thing through, and so they have they have access to excellent advice and counsel from people that they've engaged, professionals that they've engaged. So that has provided us with many opportunities to communicate very regularly.
Thanks
Frank,
for that.
what do you mean when you talk about a full partnership with respect to Ontario's Ring of Fire?
Very good question. It's as simple as if you and I owned a house together, which we didn't have much money to buy, and we borrowed most of it to pay the mortgage. But nevertheless, we owned it together 50-50. That is sort of conceptually what a limited partnership does, and that is what I have been proposing as the right way to go forward for the Ring of Fire with the First Nations. we have to find the money to develop it. They don't have any money. KWG doesn't have any money. The Ontario government is always stressed to find money. The money for these projects comes from the capital markets. Consider it a mortgage. If the project is economic, people will give you that mortgage to buy the project and go ahead and develop it. In this case, it's likely to be a multi-decade project, 50 years, 100 years, maybe beyond. I think the right way to do that is for the mine, and the thing that makes the mine feasible, the railroad. If you have a mine, you got to get the stuff you're mining to market. So in this case, you need a railroad. For that to be the house, which borrows the money, which runs the project, and when the mortgage is paid down or when the property gets worth a lot of money, the value of that equity is in each of our hands, 50-50. There's another aspect to this, which is a part of the business that I don't think is rightly shared with the First Nations, without some further negotiation and consideration, and that is where we have actually invested in science and in marketing. And so there's three parts of this business. There's the mining of it, the transportation of the stuff that's mined, and then the refining and marketing of it. And that third part is not something that I would consider part of the house. And I've actually, the first time I proposed this to Chief Bruce Achneepaneskum of Martin Falls, he said, "Well, how do we get into the refining company?" And I said, "Well, that's something we have to talk about." But fundamentally, that's how I envision the right way to go forward.
Frank, you recently attended the mining symposium in Thunder Bay. Can you tell me how was the trip and what transpired there?
Sure. It was a mining symposium. We've gone to many, but this one was a bit different. We went at the invitation of the chief of Martin Falls First Nation, and he and his advisors were concerned to give the members of the Martin Falls First Nation every opportunity to be as fully informed as possible as to who is doing things in their traditional territory, who they are, what they're doing, what they would like to do, hope to do, have done, so on and so forth. And so it was held in Thunder Bay, in the Port Arthur side of Thunder Bay, at the Grand Old Port Arthur Hotel. But it was done there and then for a purpose, because the largest part of the members of the Martin Falls First Nation actually live in Thunder Bay, live and work in Thunder Bay, as opposed to the perhaps 20-30% of them that continue to reside on the reserve. And so this was a way for the chief and council to bring us together and on a first-hand basis speak directly to the members of the community. And it was done, as you've seen, as has been reported, in advance of an announcement by the Premier of Ontario that she had come to agreement with the Martin Falls First Nation on the north-south transportation corridor, and in fact with Nabinimik and Webequie on the east-west transportation corridor. But for purposes of what we were doing there, it was a symposium for the Martin Falls First Nation.
Frank, tell me about a day in the life of Frank Smink.
Oh, cool. Well, let's limit it to Frank Smink and KWG.
Sure.
I'm not sure anybody needs to know what I do morning, noon, and night, but
Of course.
This is just the most fascinating opportunity I could possibly have imagined. I am a bit of a student of history and geography, and had the good fortune to pick up just a little bit of chemistry and geology and physics and so on. And the discovery of chrome in Canada in 2006, chromite, and the people I encountered as a consequence of that the late Frank Winter, a man who spent his life making stainless steel in the melt shops of the world. Coupled with a little bit of insight from some of the old timers, the late Pat Sheridan being one that comes to mind almost every day, encouraging me to think innovatively, and here we are. We have a commodity which Frank Winter thought we could make better, cheaper, and more of than anybody else in the world, and he took early steps to invent a process that would make that so. Because that discovery happened, as you've heard me say before, at the same time that North America found it had more natural gas than it could use for centuries as a result of fracking. And that initial work that Frank did was then furthered by another brilliant man who was born and educated in Turkey and immigrated to Canada and is now the chief scientist of Canmet mining branch, the so-called mining branch of the government of Canada. And he's become convinced that Frank Winter didn't have it 100% right, but he was onto something. And now Dohan Paktunç is his name, is quite firm in his conviction that this can be the case. And then, of course, you have to understand a little bit about how the world works. Chrome becomes stainless steel. Stainless steel is mostly made, 70% of it or thereabouts is made in China. So we can't aspire to be in the business of making ferrochrome to become stainless steel unless China's a customer. So on a daily basis, I work with Silke Wu, who you've interviewed, and it's been, late in life, a tremendous education on China, on Turkey, on places that I remember reading about in textbooks in high school, but that I knew nothing about, and so that is just fascinating. It's endlessly fascinating. It's endlessly challenging. It also happened at a time when really there was absolutely no interest from the capital markets in the commodity markets, and so it's been very tough to stay the course and keep going. It's tough on the shareholders too, because if there's no interest, then they see the value of their company at a far lower price than I think it might otherwise.
Frank, the Prime Minister of Canada has just announced he's set to abolish the Indian Act. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's that could be for this Mr. Trudeau something maybe equally as momentous as his father, what his father did when he observed the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. The state, has no business running a separate legislation for a separate people. I think we're at a point in the history of Canada, young as it is, where it's high time that we got rid of the Indian Act and all of the reasons for it and all of the things that fall from it. One of the, as a lawyer, having come late to any kind of understanding of the First Nations reality in Canada, in Northern Ontario in particular, one thing I would say is we have to replace this with mechanisms. We would call it governance. In companies, you call it corporate governance. But for example, you just imagine trying to run something where the boss changes every 2 years. That's what happens in every First Nation in Ontario. every 2 years there's an election, and as often as not, there's a new chief elected. It's the rare case where the same chief was re-elected time and time again. As it happens, Martin Falls was one of those rare cases under Elijah Muniz. But it's just no way to run anything. You couldn't run a business that way. So you can't run a First Nation that way. There has to be a governance mechanism, a constitution of some kind, where continuity and survivability is built in. Whether it's a chief must be succeeded by a deputy chief or a vice chief or something like that. There has to be continuity, I think that would be, were I asked to help the new Minister of Indigenous Affairs, I would ask her to focus on that, because I think it would change so much just if there was governance continuity.
You're an investor with KWG Resources, and you have an idea for KWG to sell chrome by using a cryptocurrency. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure everyone's heard of something called Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency that's out there with no assets behind it at all. It's what they call a fiat currency. The current valuation of all the Bitcoins out there is around $64 billion. Several other cryptocurrencies, the top 4 cryptocurrencies range from Bitcoin at $64 billion down to something like Ethers that are $22 billion in value. And there's at least one other called Ripple that's worth around $7 billion. And what we see in issuing a true asset-backed cryptocurrency, because all of the above that I've mentioned have nothing behind them at all, is the resource that is the Ring of Fire has approximately, some estimates range for over $1 trillion worth of chrome in the ground. Moreover, there's now serious interest from the Chinese and others to invest $3 billion in KWG's railway to transport that chrome. And we came up with an idea where we could issue $5 billion worth of cryptocurrency that's backed by chrome. And we believe that investors that want to go away from US dollars into cryptocurrencies would love to have a cryptocurrency that doesn't have quite the volatility of Bitcoin that's varied anywhere from $800 earlier this year. Today it trades around $4,400. By the way, cryptocurrencies have outperformed every asset out there in the last 5 years. An asset-backed cryptocurrency is an incredible financing solution where we're planning to do an ICO. And we've got serious institutional interest in buying this type of asset-backed cryptocurrency, because it would actually be the 5th largest cryptocurrency by market cap, and it would have a distinct competence in being only cryptocurrency that has significant assets backing it. That if you buy one Pharaoh, which is what we're planning to call it, it'll be exchangeable for 1 pound of chrome upon completion of the mine 7 years down the road. The money used to finance the mine would actually be a reserve inside these tokens, and as certain milestones are met, the money would be gradually released to develop the mine. So it's a wonderfully secure investment. You either have a coin that has the cash backing it as an asset in reserve, and as that cash is drawn down, it's replaced by fully functional producing chrome.
Frank, tell me how KWG Resources patent can have an effect on the economic impact of Ontario's Ring of Fire.
Profound. So it's not a patent, it's a patent application in being prosecuted in 7 national jurisdictions where chrome is produced and where it's possible to use the method. The method being direct reduction, to go from one solid state to another solid state without going through a liquid state. And It was an invention that we acquired from the late Frank Winter, who was had a lifetime making stainless steel in the various melt shops of the world, and concluded that this was a more economical, less energy-intensive way to make ferrochrome out of chromite. He, in fact, demonstrated that, filed the claim on the invention. We acquired that claim, and we've been prosecuting patent applications based on that invention subsequent to acquiring the claim. Subsequently, the Canadian government, Ministry of Natural Resources, CanMet Lab in Ottawa, has done independent research on the claim, on the method, and have concluded that, as we did, that if this method can be taken out of the lab and put into commercialized in large scale, large volume, that it appears to be a way of making ferrochrome at a 30 or 40% lower cost than the methods presently employed elsewhere in the world to make ferrochrome. So that now, the other unique thing about it is it seems to work very well with the Ring of Fire chromite, and that may be a particular unique set of circumstances. So we have cheap natural gas in Canada, we have the Ring of Fire chromite, huge deposit, and those look to describe a situation that will make us very, very competitive in the ferrochrome business.
Frank, how will the news of the road to Ontario's Ring of Fire impact KWG Resources?
Oh, it changes everything. It wasn't just a road, it was actually two roads announced by the Premier. And one is the east-west road from Pickle Lake to Nabinimik, and Nabinimik to Webequie ultimately to the Ring of Fire. That's the one option that money is available for. The other is the north-south, the so-called north-south road. And it was conceived as a multi-user corridor and a community access road to the Martin Falls First Nation community at Agoki Post. Our agreement going into this with the Martin Falls First Nation was that we very much supported their aspiration to have that access road and connection by road to Nakina and Trans-Canada Highway and Thunder Bay and so on. But it was provided that didn't interfere with our ability to create the railroad alongside of it in future. The road, as the community access road is conceived, is going to go north from Nakina to the Albany River and then across the Albany River and then east along the Albany River to Agoki Post, which is on the north side of this very large river, one of Canada's biggest. And so we're going to get across the Albany River, and we're going to do it on the basis that everybody understands. So we're going to have road access to Martin Falls, but we're going to, in the future, have some kind of haulage access, possibly a railroad, beyond that to the Ring of Fire, and then south alongside of that road to south to Nakina. So it's a major step forward. I mean, the government, for all intents and purposes, committed whatever part of that $1 billion set aside for the Ring of Fire Infrastructure Development Corporation to those two options. And the Martin Falls Chief and Council and their advisors are going hell-bent for leather to make it happen. So we're very encouraged. It's a breakthrough in the Ring of Fire history.
The story just doesn't seem to have an end to it. What do you say to that?
I couldn't agree more. It just goes on and on and on and on. And but I think there's an end in sight. I think and I hope it comes sooner rather than later. I must say this is not easy. I think what Premier Wynne did is a huge step forward, and as usual, all kinds of problems resulted from that. From even something as simple as saying, we'd like to put some money behind the First Nations who want community access roads, and just something as simple as that. It isn't simple. They said, but if we have this kind of road, then people, can everyone use it, or is it just a restricted road? And if it's a restricted road, the communities have a choice of whether or not it's a policed road. And if it's a policed road, then the vehicles have to be licensed and insured. If it's not a policed road, then the vehicles don't have to be licensed and insured. So you get that kind of, stuff that you can't imagine, but you get that kind of issue arising out of something that simple. And there's no answers to these things. So as a result of that, they can't go forward with any kind of clarity on what kind of a road they want, because they don't know what kind of a road they can have with the regulations. And so, as John Gammon once famously explained to me, he says this Ring of Fire is going to move the developed frontier, or the frontier of development in the province of Ontario, from Timmins north to the Albany River and beyond. But as we do that, we're going into places where we have these remote communities, and they're remote because there's no road access. And so they, even something as simple as communicating to the members of a First Nation like that is virtually impossible, given how regulated a society we operate in, of necessity, in 2017, when concepts that we are able to articulate in English, they don't even have any words for that in Ojibwe or Cree or Ojibwe. The concepts simply don't exist. And so you're talking to people who have lived an isolated existence for millennia, as we know, and whose elders, who have the utmost of respect in their society, are able to communicate only in their native language of Ojibwe. So how can you even address, what is it you would like to see? Because the whole idea of probably they don't even have a, this is probably apocryphal, but they are unlikely to have a word for road. They certainly don't have a word for insurance and a licensed car, those things. So that's one of the reasons why this story goes on and on and on. Having said that, the choice of the commitment to a community access road to Martin Falls with a bridge across the Albany River is a huge step forward in connecting the Ring of Fire and its minerals to markets. That bridge is a major piece of infrastructure. It's very costly, and we then have to go north of the bridge through the lowlands and across the Atawapska River, which will not be an inexpensive exercise either. But at least we're halfway, or a little better than halfway there.
Great.
But I think also that now that when the shovels actually hit the ground, the world of stainless steel is going to start getting quite focused on this source of this probably the globe's largest source of the highest grade principal ingredient of stainless steel after iron. So it's coming, and I think I'm hopeful. My expectation is that the snowball has slowly started rolling.
Joined here by King Jabbar of the Dino Empire and blockchain genius Antoine. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us. We're very happy to be here. The Empire is happy to be here. Exciting times.
All right, so my question for you today is, we're talking about Faro, guys, and how long before this financing option may become something tangible? And just add a little more for our viewers, will you?
All right, so the Faro token has already been created. It's an ERC20 token on the Ethereum blockchain. In case you don't know what that is, the world has completely changed. Money has become programmable, and any company, any organization, any individual on the planet can create their own currency, create their own asset-backed representation of anything. You can create a token of this cup, you can create a token of a car, a plane, a house, and put it on the blockchain, the new internet of money. So the Faro token has been created. Myself and Antoine have created it. In terms of liquidity, as soon as it hits the exchanges, you can liquidate your Faro. You can trade it. People will speculate on it. There will be steel companies that will buy your Faro. If you have $1 million worth of Faro, you can sell it. And I believe the Faro has $1 trillion worth of Chrome in the ground. So this is interesting. This is one of the few asset-backed cryptocurrencies with a higher market cap than Ethereum itself. And Antoine will speak to that. But in terms of liquidity, you can liquidate it on the markets, or you can wait 7 years until the Chrome comes out of the ground, and then you can convert your Faro for the equivalent amount of Chrome in the ground. So this is exciting. It's interesting, man. It's exciting times. Tokenization, and I'll leave it to our blockchain genius, Antoine.
Well, I think something you said might have been a little inaccurate. I think the market cap of Faro is supposed to be 5 billion, which is only going to be a fraction of what's going to be mined.
See, I learned something new, man. Antoine always teaches.
The main thing I suppose people would be interested in is how the Ethereum blockchain can sort of handle all of this value, and the token being worth market cap of 5 billion should be fine on that. The main question is, can tokens on Ethereum end up exceeding the value of the native token Ether?
I say yes.
Well, that's
but it's experimental.
It's experimental.
This is the first time ever.
Even the Faro token is experimental. I have to say. I mean, kudos to KWG Resources for going full steam on this and being an early adopter of this technology. If it succeeds, it will be very extremely rewarding, and it'll be the first of many such tokens to come, of asset-backed, commodity-backed tokens. And one thing also is, once you have the token, you'll be able to do all kind of different crazy things with it. Put into smart contracts, all kinds of different types of funds and mixing different tokens and baskets. That's the kind of world that's awaiting for any commodity-backed token if this experiment is successful.
And I'll say this much: the Faro token will be on Dino Wallet. The Dino Wallet, the Dino Empire has some Faro, so buy some Dino tokens. We're going to build a little bit of a reserve of Faro. We're going to build the reserves of asset-backed commodities, tokenized commodities, and our wallet, one of the best ERC20 wallets, mobile wallets, will be on the Play Store soon. And you'll be able to download it and add Faro, add any ERC20 token representing anything in the world. So look out for Dino Wallet, Dino Empire.
Joined here by expert Andy Morgan. He's a contractual consultant in finance. And Andy, last week I spoke with King Jabbar of the Dino Empire and blockchain expert Antoine. And I want to know, what's your role here and what can you add to that conversation?
Okay, historically I've been involved in financings, not so much in the mining terrain, but I had been watching the Ring of Fire, which has been around for 10 years. It's a very valuable resource, one of the largest in Canada, and as to date, no one has solved the puzzle as to how to placate the First Nations people and turn this mine into a viable resource. So I'm helping Frank, who's the chairman of KWG, to find some solutions to make this mine operational. Part of the problem with this mine is its inaccessibility. It's in the middle of a huge swamp, and what Frank has done has negotiated with China Rail to build a railway that's gives you the extra 330 kilometers necessary to transport ore to a refining smelter facility which lies in the Greenstone area. I have a considerable network because obviously I'm a little older than most people around here, and so we're using them as a resource to raise money, and also I've educated myself in the blockchain and various ways the blockchain can assist us in raising money in a simple fashion. I view the blockchain as a world-changing phenomenon. Blockchain is a world-changing technology is because it breaks down borders between countries. So governments aren't able just to keep printing their own money on the blockchain. They have to abide by a world standard. And this presents, in Frank's case, this presents another opportunity, and for many mining companies, to raise money in the form of tokens which would be issued on the blockchain, and have a pension fund, for example, could invest in an asset-backed coin that would give them an asset at the end of a certain period, but they would manage to participate in the increased value of that asset over that period of time, which may be 10 years, the life it takes for the mine to go into production. So this becomes very attractive for the investor because they really don't have to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the mine, but they do have an ability to control how money is released and distributed for the development of the mine itself. So it's what the blockchain and things like Ethereum have done is given companies a whole new way to raise money, which is not necessarily constrained by jurisdictional borders.
Nice.
And that's it's looking complicated, and I think the key is to design an investment for pension funds and individuals that's simple and easy to understand, which is what I'm working on at the moment.
Great, and I agree with you that it's nice what Frank is doing with regard to the partnerships with First Nations as well throughout this entire process.
The First Nations plays a key role in this. I think people aren't fully aware of the scope of legislation that they have within their own territories, and if this is done in the right way, in a way that observes a decorum which respects their values, it can benefit them as a society and everyone involved. It can provide jobs and employment and education and hospitals, all the things that everybody likes today.
Economic stability.
Absolutely.